Hello, everybody, and welcome to Marketing Rebels. We are going to be talking about professionalism today because we're entering into a new year, 2024, and a lot of people are heading in with a head full of steam, and we're going, I'm going to be professional. I'm going to own this business thing. I'm going to slam dunk. And you've heard me say so many times, what is professional anyways? And how do we combine that with authenticity? Well, we've got a lot of interesting perspectives to share today, and that's why we have Rachel here. Rachel's going to hop on here and tell us a little bit about herself, why this matters to her, and why it should matter to you. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Hi, Shauna. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Rachel Wall. I am a branding strategist and podcast host and serial entrepreneur and doer of all the things. And I am the first one to say that professionalism looks different for everyone. What is considered professional to me may not be considered professional to you. And I think the important thing to do is to read the room and stay true to yourself and figure out ahead of time where you're going and what you're doing and how that's going to affect the people around you and what their experience is going to be. So lots of variables there.
So many variables that we can imagine people get very overwhelmed when they're hopping online and they're being told, myself being one of those people who say it, and I'll be waving flags until the end of days, be authentic. And people get really nervous about that because authenticity and being professional often feel disconnected.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, one of our conversations we've had in the past, we touched on the idea of formality. Because to be professional, many people perceive that as to be formal. And to some people, being formal doesn't feel authentic. And then, so too, we flip the coin.
Yep.
Being casual feels a little bit more authentic to some people, like myself. And so that feels more authentic. But is that unprofessional? How do we tackle that? How do you tackle that? Because I know you and I, we walk on opposite sides of the coin while really achieving the same goal.
Mm-hmm. I think it depends on who you are as an individual and whether or not you're actually embodying who you are versus who you're projecting and trying to be. So for a lot of people, I work in branding both in the business side where I help people brand their business and then I help people brand themselves. And a lot of times I find that with some of my more corporate professionals that I work with, if they're in banking or finance, typically their personalities somewhat tend to lend to be a little bit more refined or polished, or it's that traditional business casual attire, and that fits with their personality and it works. It also works for their industry. And if they were my suggestion would be, if you were going into a situation where you're asking for a loan or you're asking for investment or you're asking for some sort of formal arrangement, then elevate to that level if that's the outcome that you're wanting to get. But on the flip side of that, I look at my husband who's in music tech, and the man wears t-shirts, jeans, and flip-flops. And that's how he rolls into an investment meeting because that's who he is and that's how his company exchanges and does business, and it works for him. So it's very situational, and it really just depends on what you want your outcome to be and what you want the experience to be for the person that you're engaging with. If that does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And think about any level. And I love the way you describe this and using your personal experience and your husband's experience as well, because in the end, your husband is embarking on a professional exchange.
Mm-hmm.
And he's still able to show up in t-shirt, jeans, and flip-flops and be perceived professionally and still create the experience, the brand experience that he wants to, revolving around his business and his personal brand. And then yourself, I know we were talking about how you kind of prefer a more formal approach. You like to formalize both the front end and the back end of your business in a very strategic way. And I remember we were talking about that. I said, I'm super casual about things. I like to approach things like you and I, we're going to sit here, we're going to have a cup of coffee, and we're just going to chat and we're going to have a good time. There's zero formalization. And yet we're able to have a professional conversation both ways. on
Mm-hmm.
your show, because we've chatted on your show, Pulp to Profit, and then on my show here, I'm Marketing Rebels, two different kind of dynamics approached in different ways, addressing the same topic in a very professional way. What's your
Mm-hmm.
here's the question. I know I just went on without a question, but what is your experience then in that, and what makes you want to or feel more comfortable showing up with that formal edge? And how would you what would you say to other people who are showing up and being like, I need to be professional, but I'm too formal, or I'm not formal enough, or I'm this, that, or the other? How did you approach it?
I think it would be helpful to break down what is considered formality, but versus what is considered what we would how we I'm all tongue tied here. When I think of formality, I think of like three-piece suit, heels, really business casual like vibes and aesthetic. But the reality is that formality can be a totally different aesthetic, but still have the structure that you would expect inside of a formal air quotes institution. So like when people do business with me, it's very formal in the sense that it's contractual. There's not a lot of wiggle room on inside of that contract. Like once the terms and everything we've come together and we've really worked that out, it's very rigid. And it's the reason it's rigid is because it's really to protect both sides, and it's to ensure that the experience for both my team and for the client is an enjoyable one, and it's one where everyone knows what the expectations are. So I'm very formal in that sense. I'm very formal in the sense of how I create content, and that there are SOPs and there are systems. That doesn't necessarily mean that my formality can be mistaken for a presence of a filter, because I'm not filtered. I just have structure in place on how I do things. And the absence of that structure doesn't necessarily mean that someone is unprofessional. It just means that the experience may be different. So it's really about owning the expectation and setting the standard and making sure that you set that standard and show up. If you're going to set the bar high, that you're able to hit that bar every time. Otherwise, lower it, because consistency is key there.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. That's so hilarious because if anybody knows, if anybody's watching, if you're listening, then you may not know, but I do the scratchy scratch with the pencil as people are talking. And the first word that came out, consistency, because it's
Mm-hmm.
so true. So we're equating formality with the structure that allows us to be consistent. And
Mm-hmm.
when we say consistent or consistency, we're talking about consistency within your brand, the experience that your brand creates,
Mm-hmm.
as well as consistency with the execution of your marketing,
Mm-hmm.
your systems, your processes, your onboarding, your client experience.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're talking about with regards to formality when it comes to this. Not necessarily a three-piece suit
Right.
or a bohemian flowy dress,
Mm-hmm.
because both of those things can be formal provided they are consistent and professional. Because remember, professional doesn't mean you can't wear a bathing suit. Professional means that you know how to do your job.
Right.
There you go. So if
And
anybody's
knowing
go
what
ahead.
those boundaries are, and how to behave inside the constraints of those boundaries that both parties agree on. I do branding intensives in a bathing suit most of the time, or resort wear. We'll sit in the pool and that's where we have our chat about your business. Or we'll sit on the patio and eat charcuterie. Like it's very, quote, informal from the outside, but there is a structure and there is a plan on what the execution of that day is going to look like. And we both understand what the outcome is going to be going into the arrangement. So what we're wearing doesn't really matter in that instance. It's that's a great example.
Love it. And I love the idea. Like everybody just sit down and picture this for a moment, because for many of us, not for all of us, but for many of us, this is the dead of winter. And we're sitting poolside with a
Mm-hmm.
charcuterie board and friggin' nailing our brand.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to me, that just sounds like a great way to start 2024.
It's a lot of fun. It's honestly, I once I embraced and started embodying who I am and allowed that to come through my business, that's where I found that glow, and that's where I found that piece of like, okay, I'm meant to do this. This right here is where the magic is.
Tell me a little bit about what that experience felt like before you found that, because I know a lot of people coming into this either don't have a firm grip on their personal brand and their professional brand, or perhaps they don't have any grip at all. They're just showing up because so and so told them to. Some guru said this is what you do, and that's what they followed. Because I know that was my experience. I just did what the bigwig said, and like you, I experienced kind of that shift when I realized that I have all that I need, and I don't need to follow this decorum that was not built for me. So tell me a little bit more about your experience before you made that switch.
So I found myself in a past life, I was a hairstylist. I was in a really bad car accident in 2021, and that's what ended my time doing hair. I thought that was my life's passion. And I still have a really, really deep love for the industry. I work with a lot of wellness and beauty professionals just because I was a service provider, and that's kind of ingrained in my blood. But I built my business with a lot of masculine energy, and I built my business chasing a roadmap that worked for other people. And I learned a lot throughout my time in the industry and throughout my time owning, brick and mortar business and really operating. I used to do concert promotion and live events. So like between the two kind of past lives, I've learned a lot about what it air quotes takes to get there. I've had multiple six-figure businesses, and that's great. But in order to really feel complete and fulfilled, you have to live in alignment with what's true for you. And I'm going to get a little bit woo. I hope that's okay.
Absolutely.
But I've done a lot of like internal work, and I've done a lot of research into what my human design is, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
Oh yeah.
But
Listen,
I
human design.
am a
I need to do a
projector.
shameless promo for an episode that we did right early in this thing. Jen Dice did a whole human design episode. So anybody watching today, look for Jen Dice. I'll even link it everywhere you're listening to this. I'm going to show you where it is, because human design is key. Rachel's saying it right now too. I am all for this. It will change your life.
Yes.
Okay.
It does, because it's that whole, it just makes sense, and it doesn't feel like something that's like, and I'm a devout Catholic. I don't want to put a bunch of stock into different things spiritually in that regard, but from a alignment perspective and astrological perspective, and just I'm reading it and I'm like, oh my gosh,
what is your human
this
design?
is me to a
What is
T. I'm a projector.
Oh, that's fun.
Yes. So I don't have capacity to constantly be doing. It goes against everything about my like my internal wiring, and I'm not an authority on this subject, so I'm not trying to plug in too much info onto it outside of what my base knowledge is. But what I will say is that I suffer from several autoimmune conditions. And when I live within alignment of my design, and when I embody who I am as a being versus as a doer or job title, I earn more, I feel more peace. Life is just overall better. And so I don't even know how we got onto this, but
alignment. When you're living in misalignment, when you're doing what other people tell you to do instead of what you know to be true, then you're going to be lost, and you're not going to achieve the success that you were intended to achieve.
No. And it's not always equated to a revenue number or a profitability number. Like it's not all monetary. And in past lives, that's how I ran my businesses, and I was very doing focused. And so I found myself just drowning in struggle. Like the bank account looked great, but my personal life was it was taking a hit, or my relationships were tanking, or if my relationships were okay, they were all business relationships. They weren't anything outside of business. There just wasn't a whole lot of like well-roundedness to the blessing. And when I started living in alignment and I started building my business around who I am by first developing my personal brand and then building my business in alignment with that, I quadrupled my income. I was able to take more time off. I haven't worked since December 1st. So
Like, happy
it's a
dance behind the
totally
scenes.
different
Behind the scenes,
experience.
Shauna's doing a happy dance, by the way. Just, it's great. It's amazing.
Yeah. Totally different experience. So I think it just comes down to really figuring out who you are and developing that first, and then building everything else around that.
Perfect. Beautiful. And that's regardless of how formal or casual you want to be, honing in on that authenticity and showing up professionally in your own bucket of whatever that looks like for you, right? Like, and that's the thing. And you don't need to label it either. As long as you're doing your job effectively and efficiently, you're providing that you're serving, you're truly serving, and you're coming from a place that of alignment. There you have it, like in a nutshell. And so once you found that, you're sitting here just really doing the things that light you up. Now, let's talk for a moment about that, because I know that your podcast is one of those things. Can you tell me a little bit more about Pulp to Profit?
Yeah, so Pulp to Profit has been a process. I I wanted a blog 7 years ago. My husband and I had just gotten married, and I remember saying I could do this mommy blog thing. And I could do this. I could, create the written content, I could create the visual content. Like, I want to be a blogger. And I remember stepping up to a camera for the first time, and it was like boom, all of that imposter syndrome and body dysmorphia and all of that head trash just came full force. The comparison-itis and analysis paralysis took over. And fast forward 7 years later, I still don't have a blog. Um, but I've transitioned into podcasting because what I found is that I can couple both my love of having genuine conversation with some fun written copy and then all of the visual content creation that I love doing. It can all kind of come together right here behind the mic. But 7 months ago when I started, I stepped up to the mic and I could not talk. I literally could not talk. And I realized right then and there, my podcast isn't supposed to be a marketing channel. My podcast isn't supposed to be anything other than this very lifestyle outlet of this is who I am. I'm going to share it with the world. I really like my job, and my job is a big part of my life. So, hey, we'll call it B2B. So that's kind of how it came together. So it's a lot of personal and business branding, a lot of this huge intersection of where woo meets the work. I'm a little wooey. I like to work a little bit. It's that whole I just be who I am, and it tends to be profitable. So Pulp to Profit.
I love it. I love it so much. Like, honestly, it's one of those things where you listen to yourself. Just once again, I just can't stress this enough, because we are in the new phase of, I mean, really, let's be real. I just watched a thing by what's his name, Neil deGrasse. Neil, is that the guy's name, the scientist? He says the new year is such a stupid thing. It really is such a stupid
It really
thing.
is.
The world,
It really
we
is.
rotate
The full moon was a while
right?
ago.
And it's like we rotate around the sun every year, every 365 days thereabouts, and everybody goes, yay, look at us do this. But there's really no astrological significance other than the fact that it just goes around the sun. Like, there's nothing else. And we celebrate. And he says, I mean, he says himself, like, that's great. I mean, any reason to celebrate, go not do it. Right. But it doesn't really hold any sort of intrinsic meaning. So I needed to share that, because here we are talking about we're fresh, we're new, but really, if we're being real, spring is kind of that rebirth time for all intents and purposes. But
110%, 110%. And I told my husband this literally on Sunday. I said, this is like a Gregorian opportunity to just sit at home a little bit longer, because I am not emotionally ready to resolve to do anything other than keep being who I am and plugging along. I know what my goals are for this year, and I know that I light up in about March. March is usually when I blossom, and then summertime, I don't know what happens, but I'm an alligator. I'm out in the heat. My skin starts glowing. I get like really glowy and dewy, and it's like I bloom in the summer, and it's like, okay, this is not my peak season, and I am not taking on anything huge right now.
That's too funny. I love it.
Yeah,
So
no, not my
here
season.
Here we are in the new year, and we're pausing. And this is beautiful. I think this is actually quite beautiful because a lot of people want to try to take on too much when the days are short,
Yep.
when we're tired, when seasonally we are intended to rest, to hibernate. So
Yep.
if you're thinking, and when I say you, I mean you, but also I mean all of you, the French vous, all of you listening, when you're thinking, I've got these resolutions and these goals, and I'm going to achieve so much, and I'm going to be authentic, and I'm going to be professional, and I'm going to do all, it's all there, and you can see it, and it's exciting. I suppose our mutual experience, but yours in particular that we've discussed today, is just a testament to say, take a minute, take a breath, lean into who you are, and let it roll. Let it roll out, because it will. But if you dive in too fast, you may be doing something that's out of alignment. You may be doing something that will feel like you're running you're running the short race, and you're right there at the finish line, but it turns out to be the long race, and now you're tired. And now we get to February, and then everything falls to shit. Because that's what happens. It's actually statistically proven. So that
if I had to do that thing where I have to pick a word, because I feel like that's what you have to do at the new year, that's like the big invitation. My word this year would be cadence.
Oh, that's a beautiful word.
And it's because it's not about frequency. It's not about the amount of effort. It's just about being consistent. It doesn't have to be a huge step forward. A little scoot is still going in the forward direction. Not going backward is still not, hurting anything. Like you cannot go backward for one day. I was sick yesterday. I did not hit my steps yesterday, and no one died. Like,
yes.
I might have had I gotten too far from the clubhouse at my amenity center and not been able to find a bathroom.
There you go.
So
there you go. That's a beautiful word, though, and I love that. And I cadence. It's beautiful. I love that so much. And I think that's a really great reminder as we're entering into this space, as people are starting to consider the rebirth of things, despite the fact that we just discussed how it's not necessarily the time for that. Just to remember, we can keep going without needing to reinvent the wheel. That's beautiful. I appreciate you so much. And I know that you just shared like a wealth of information, but I'd love to invite you to share a little, whatever final thoughts are coming up for you with the world, of course, and then where people can get in touch with you so that we don't miss out on any more of this amazing wealth of information and experience from you.
Yeah. So I love the word cadence. I also am really obsessing over true connection. So I am not one of those people that if you send a follow request or send a DM, that would just ignore it. I'm someone that really does want to engage. So if you would like to be friends and send me a connection request either on LinkedIn or on Instagram, I would love to have you in my community, and check out the podcast. It's new. It's not perfect, still very formal. But it's rolling along, and I'm super excited to share that with the world. So thank you so much, Shauna, for having me today.
My goodness, you're amazing. You're always giving me, just to let everybody know, we've chatted a few times. I'm over there on the Pulp to Profit podcast, and every time there's always something richer and more full coming from Rachel. So I encourage you to watch listen to the podcast. My apologies. Listen to the podcast, connect with Rachel, dive deeper into that world, because it is truly filled with abundance. Now with that,
thank you.
Stop. With that, I want to let you guys all know that we are in a new year, and I'm not stopping. every week. Join in, subscribe, follow, like, share with your friends, because every week we're having amazing conversations at least once a week, probably more like 2 times a week. And you don't want to miss out, because we're already filled with amazing names, and I am ridiculously excited. So join us as we have these conversations, and we will chat soon.